Today we're talking with John Reilly. The interviewer is Mike McGregor with the Grand Valley State University's Veterans Oral History Project. John, to begin, where and when were you born?
I was born in Kittery, Maine on December 5th, 1946.
Okay, and did you grow up in Maine or?
No, my father was stationed in Portsmouth, New Hampshire in the U.S. Navy, and I was born in the Naval Hospital there, and we moved to New Jersey shortly thereafter to where my father set up a medical practice. He was a doctor.
Okay, so you then you grew up in New Jersey.
Yes.
Yeah. Tell me about growing up in New Jersey.
New Jersey's a great place to grow up. Spent really my entire life there. Went to grammar school, high school in New Jersey, and went out of state to college in Pennsylvania. After graduation from college and the military service, I returned to New Jersey and worked out of that state in a number of jobs for over 30 years and retired about 4 years ago and still live in New Jersey, so it's a great place to live and I've been very happy there.
So your father was a physician. Did your mother work outside the home?
My mother was a nurse. My mom and dad met in New York City. My father was a intern. My mother was an RN, and they were married. And then my father went in the U.S. Navy during World War II to serve there.
Okay, so you finished high school and you said you went away to college in Pennsylvania?
Yes, I went to Villanova University. I got a bachelor's degree there in 1968.
What was your degree in?
It was social science. It was a social science major. It's a general liberal arts major, and I thought that would be a good background for someone in my position to kind of go forward and maybe get a good job in business down the road.
Okay, so you graduated from college in 68.
Yes.
Prior to that time, did you have a student deferment?
Yes, I had a student deferment, and it was at the time of the lottery system, and my lottery number was like 57 or so. So I was faced with a decision in shortly after graduation as to what I was going to do with military service and work and so on. So I actually enlisted in the Army.
Yeah.
In 1968, in July or so, I enlisted in the Army.
Okay, you enlisted in July. Were you able to pick your branch or specialty?
Yes. What happened was I enlisted in July. They gave me an option of 3 combat arms: infantry, armor, or artillery. I was given a choice, and I said I thought I might want to try artillery. And they put me. I was scheduled to go into the officer candidate school program. And my enlistment date, actual date, was in November of 68, so I had like a 3-month period where I worked for a company in New Jersey, and then I went into the military in November. From that point on, I was going to serve for a number of years after that.
Okay, so now you enlist. Was it a 3-year enlistment or?
It actually was going to be close to a 3-year enlistment. It would have been basic, advanced training, and then officer candidate school, and then a 2-year obligation after commission. That was the plan at the time.
Okay, so where did you do your basic training at?
Did my basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and I spent about 8 weeks there.
Okay, and then after basic, did you get any leave or did you go right to AIT?
Oh, after basic, I was sent down to the Army Artillery School at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. So I went through advanced training at Fort Sill in the artillery specialty, and after that, I went into the officer candidate program at Fort Sill. I went into that in, I guess it would have been maybe March or April of '69. I went into the OCS program.
So was your AIT a pre-OCS AIT?
Well, it was really, I don't think everyone who was in that program necessarily went into the officer candidate school. It wasn't specialized to that extent. It was more of a general advanced training in the artillery area. But a number of my comrades went into artillery OCS with me, but not all.
So were you trained on guns or FDC or?
We were really trained on, it was a combination of things. It was guns, it was FDC, it was kind of a broad type of training and background that they gave us in that AIT program that would have been a good background for moving on to the officer candidate program.
So you finished your AIT. Did you have leave, or did you go right into OCS then?
Well, there was some leave. I went back home to New Jersey to see my family, and then I went into the OCS program, and I think, as I said, it was in April of '69, and was in that for a period of time, and then I actually decided I was going to opt out of that, opt out of the OCS program, and just spend my time in Vietnam. They told me if I left OCS, if I decided to leave, that it was going to result in definitely getting assigned to Vietnam to an artillery group, and I said that was fine with me. That's what I wanted to do at that point, so I made that decision.
So how long were you in OCS before you...
About 6 weeks out of the 6-month program. I just thought about what I wanted to do and what OCS was going to be about, and my assignment, and just what the best fit for me was. And I just decided that for me, I was going to leave OCS, and I was going to go to an artillery group. And with my training, FDC was going to be what I was going to do. I mean, that was fairly clear with my MOS. Yeah. So I decided that would be best for me.
So your MOS was 13 Echo 20?
13 Echo 20 was the fire direction control.
Okay.
Background, right?
Okay, so now you left OCS and you had the clear understanding. They said, okay, if you quit, you're going to Vietnam. How long did it take for the orders to be processed for you to go to Vietnam?
Well, really had about a month. I left OCS, and they gave me a 30-day leave where I went home, and then June 22nd, I remember the date very specifically, that I flew from, actually, let me just restate that a little bit. I went up to Fort Lewis, Washington for a period of time, for maybe a week to 10 days. I left Fort Lewis, Washington for Cam Bay on June 22nd, 1969. I remember that date very specifically. And that was the beginning of my tour. I landed that day after 18 hours of flight, and started with the assignment from there.
At Fort Sill, did they give you any special training for Vietnam at that time?
There was some, as I recall. It really wasn't. There might have been some orientation towards what we might expect with getting assigned to Vietnam, but it wasn't an extensive training. There was more training when I actually got in country. In Cameron, they sent us. I was assigned to the 101st Airborne Division. They sent us to the Benoit, to a training facility there, where they gave us a week or 10 days of orientation, and kind of educated us on what to expect and what we might encounter, and some good advice there. So we went through some training there, and some prior training in the States, but it wasn't too extensive here, as I recall.
When you got your orders for Vietnam, did you know you were going to the 101st, or?
No, actually, when I got over there, it was just. I'm going to say it was a matter of what was needed in country at the particular time, with particular military background, and what the division's need were. So I could have been assigned to any one of 6 or 7 divisions, and it just happened to be the 101st Airborne at that time, which was probably the most active group in the whole of the Vietnam theater. So it was kind of an interesting assignment.
So you got to just a replacement company and units as the need. As they had needs, they
filled them with who was available at the given time. And that
so you went from Cameron down to Benoit for the charm school, or whatever you want to call it. And at that point, you knew you were going to the 101st.
Yes. Yes.
Did you know what unit in the 101st you were going to?
No. At that time, there was a group of maybe 30, 40 soldiers that were down there at the time that I was there, and going to different units. I did not know whether it would be a 155, 105, or what type of artillery unit I was going to. So it's just a matter, again, of the needs of the 101st at that time, as to where they needed people with certain skills or background.
Just to backtrack for a minute, when the plane landed in Cameron and they opened the door, what was your first impression as you walked out?
That's an interesting question. My first thought was, I hope to God I make it through this year. I really wasn't sure what was in store for me. I had heard a lot of stories about what Vietnam was like. I had a lot of friends who served in the Marines, the Army, and the Air Force, etc. And I really wasn't sure whether I would be in an infantry company or artillery group or what kind of a position, because you hear all these kind of, in quotes, war stories about what happens over there. But I was apprehensive about the future and was unsure about what was going to happen, but kind of afraid really as a young person. So it was just a long period of time that I had to look forward to, but I did the best I could, and I thought things would work out.
So yeah, then you went to Benoit, and as part of the orientation, I'm sure it was you got kind of acclimated to the heat and the smell and
Yes.
everything else.
Yeah, it was about 110 degrees in the shade
Yeah.
with 100% humidity, so
Yeah.
it was a pretty amazing environment over there in terms of the weather and just the locale. So I knew it was going to be a long year for me, but I did the best you can again.
Okay, so
Deal
then
with
from
things.
Benoit, what happened?
Basically, what happened is after a week to 10 days of orientation training and background, they put a bunch of troops in a C-130 at Benoit and shipped us up to Fubai, which was the airport right next to Camp Eagle, where the 101st headquarters was. And after, I forget how long a flight it was. It might have been 2-3 hour flight from Benoit up to Fubai in I Corps. Got out of the plane and they took us over to this huge base there and it says, "Welcome to Camp Eagle, home of the 101st Airborne." And I was assigned to the 2nd 11th Field Artillery Group there, which was a real fun group as I found out.
So they take you to Camp Eagle. You're assigned to the 2nd of the 11th.
Right.
And did the 2nd of the 11th have a rear area establishment there?
Yes, the 2nd 11th Camp Eagle had their rear headquarters location there with the commanding officer, Colonel Seitz, and all his support officers. The fire direction group was there, the headquarters battery was there, supply battery, those kind of things were there, and it might have been 100 plus personnel were at that site. They had 3 batteries in the field at the time. Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie batteries were in different fire base supporting the infantry in that theater of operation.
Okay, so now you get to the battalion headquarters. What happened? Where were you assigned from there then?
Well, basically what happened was I got to battalion headquarters. I went into meet the first sergeant in charge of the operation there. They asked me about my background, and I was assigned to the headquarters group initially. Shortly thereafter, within a period of, could have been a few weeks, I was sent out to the field. I was actually, I was sent out to a Firebase Airborne with Charlie Battery as a member of the fire direction control group there. So I was sent out to this Firebase it was really on the Laotian border in the A Shau Valley, right on the edge of the border between Vietnam and Laos, within a few miles of that, at the top of this mountain with a bunch of artillery units there and some infantry surrounding it. So it was kind of a harrowing initial experience to go out to this base where there was supposedly a lot of Vietnamese in the area, North Vietnamese.
What kind of guns did the 2nd and the 11th have?
Well, we had 3 batteries. Each battery would have 6 howitzers, 155 howitzers deployed. Generally, all the howitzers were deployed as a unit. Sometimes they were broken up, but the Charlie battery, where I was assigned, had 6 guns at this firebase on the top of a mountain. Firebase Airborne, as it was appropriately called, was there to support the infantry that were operating in that area of the theater of the A Shau Valley.
So you joined FDC. What did FDC do there?
Well, FDC coordinated with the people firing the guns, giving them the various directions so fire would be delivered to the appropriate target. It was important to give them the proper directions or instructions, if you will, to make sure that the fire was delivered where the infantry called in fire.
So they would plot the target.
They would plot the target.
Break it down into firing data, which you then communicated to the guns?
Right. That's right. They would be firing data would be given from us to the guns would be used to deliver the rounds to the field.
So if somebody needed artillery help, you told the guns where to shoot so you could help them.
Right. We wanted to make sure that the shells landed on the bad guy rather than the good guy. That's very true.
Did you compute that data manually, or did you have a computer, or?
Well, we had computers, and we also did it manually. So we had, they had something called the FADAC there, Field Artillery Digital Arithmetic Computer. I think that stood for. This is a long time ago, so hopefully my memory serves me correctly. But we had the computers, but if the computers were down, or if we wanted to double check the data, we did it manually as well. So there were manual calculations, and there might have been 3 or 4 specialists in the team, plus we had an officer there who would sign off after we got the okay from battalion headquarters to fire. We would make sure that everybody was on the same page with the information to give to the guns, and before they said fire, we made sure that it was all in agreement.
So your fire missions had to have battalion approval before you could shoot?
Technically, yes. You had to get a sign-off from the battalion headquarters. Basically what you would do is you would call in information to battalion headquarters, and they would confirm the data and the information given. And they would sign off. An officer there would sign off. The lieutenant would sign off, and he had the authority to do that.
So typically, if somebody called in a fire mission, how long would it take before you could put rounds on the ground to help that person out?
That's a good question. We obviously try to do it as quickly as possible to support our infantry comrades. If someone, I'm trying to recollect, it's been a long time since I thought specifically about this. It could be a matter of a few minutes, maybe even less. It depends. It's not too long. It could be a couple of minutes. Could be a little bit longer than that, depending upon whether where people were firing, whether there was any question about friendlies in the area and that kind of thing. There could be extenuating circumstances.
Sure.
It could change things.
Now, would they also check your data? If you, in a fire mission, you would calculate the deflection and quadrant and charge and
yes,
all that stuff, and they would basically serve as a double check on the data that you calculated and
that's right.
Before it went out. Were there any occasions where you figured it one way and they said no?
Well, as I recollect, there were some. It wasn't too often where there was something which indicated, hey, there was a problem here with somebody's information not jiving or agreeing. But you had to really, be in agreement with this before you could, give the sign-offs.
Yeah.
So it was very important. You wouldn't sign off if the people didn't agree, because you obviously would be putting people's lives in danger if there were instructions that didn't line up. That would be a big problem. So for multiple reasons.
So what was your job then in FDC when you joined the battery?
Well, it was they had a number of different roles there, where you could be computing deflection or the elevation, altitude of the targets, and just the general information given to the gun. So they had maybe 3 people doing different aspects of that, and reading the data from the system.
So would you rotate assignments, or would you? How would that happen?
Well, usually what happened is the more experienced people, the people who have been out in the field longer, would be given the more, what I call, complicated part of the calculations, or the instructions. And so, as a rookie, I might have been doing things like, what kind of elevation or altitude you're looking at, and just, plotting the actual target. But the deflection and these kind of measurements, my recollection was typically there were certain things that were done by the more experienced people that required a little more sophisticated or technical knowledge
And deflection, you would calculate, did you have a chart where you plotted the target and then you use a protractor to determine?
They had something like that, and again, this is going back 40 years, so my recollection of the exact calculation is going to be a little bit shady or shadowy or whatever the term is, maybe not as accurate as it might have been at one time when I first came in, because I haven't frankly thought about this for a long time. But yeah, I mean, it's using a protractor and coming up with the different instructions. Again, it's been 40 years since I thought about these specific things, so it's not as clear as it might have been. But people were more experienced at the more complicated calculations. Let me just leave it at that.
Throughout your career, you kind of advanced up to do the more complicated things?
Right. I mean, when I came in, I was an E2 or E3, and you did the more basic things. And as you came up with more experience and more time in the country, you would go up to like an E5 level, which I had at the end of my tour, where you would kind of be able to do any of the different assignments, so you could handle them when you train people, the new people, the rookies who are coming in.
So how long were you at Airborne?
Well, I was at Airborne for about 6 weeks. It wasn't a real long assignment because they closed the Firebase down. And I was one of the lucky people who was decided to be there to close it down. I don't know how they selected me, maybe it was based upon experience, but there were certain people from the 2nd 11th that were left there with the infantry to close the place down. So we were there, kind of a skeleton group that were there at the very end and airlifted out after, we wrapped everything up. And I forget exactly what they did when we left, other than, a lot of the barbed wire, etc., was taken down, or I don't even remember how they got rid of all those things, but we closed the place down. Let me just leave it at that.
How did they extract the guns?
Well, they came in with Chinooks or the Sky Cranes. The aviation group came in and took the guns out, and they moved them to a different fire base. So.
And how would the personnel move then?
Also slicks, UE slicks or Chinooks, they would bring them in to remove the artillery group, the infantry as well. A lot of times they might go out into the field and go to a different area in that same general neighborhood, but they could move the fire base to a different location. Sometimes it could be close, sometimes it could be many miles away.
I gotta stop it for a minute. Okay, so you closed Firebase Airborne,
Right.
and you redeployed to another Firebase.
Yes.
And what happened then?
Well, basically what happened then is I went from Firebase Airborne to a Firebase called Berchtesgaden, which was in another part of the A Shau Valley, and I was reassigned there in a fire direction control position as well, similar to what I had on Firebase Airborne. So we moved the guns there, and I was at Berchtesgaden, was assigned there.
Was it an established Firebase?
Yes, yeah, it was a large established fire base with 155s. They had a 105 howitzer group as well, and infantry mortar group, as well as they had a company that was defending the perimeter in Berchtesgaden when I went in there.
I gotta stop it again. Okay, at the new fire base that you were at, was there any change in the procedures that you'd have to follow, or?
No, not really. It was pretty much the same routine, as we described before. Same number of guns, the officers were the same group, and the team was pretty much the same. So it was a similar setup at just a different locale in the A Shau Valley, further south a little bit.
About how many fire missions would you process a day?
It varied quite a bit. It might be anywhere from 2 to 5, maybe even less. 5 would be an awful lot, I would think. They had some scheduled missions where they would do interdictory type fire, I think it was called, where we would just fire out into the jungle in the middle of the night to locations where they thought there might be enemy soldiers. So that was some of it. But actual contact missions, it could vary from anywhere from 2 to 4 or whatever. On a real busy day it might be 4 or 5, but normally it'd be just a few.
On either of these fire bases, Airborne or Berchtesgaden, where you were at, were you subject to any enemy attack or any enemy shelling, or?
Well, yes, at the Berchtesgaden they had mortars and rockets come in there on occasion. Airborne, no. We didn't really get any attacks. I mean, there was threat of attack there, but there was never, I don't recall any rounds actually coming in, but at Berchtesgaden, I do recall, rockets being fired in that area and mortars, as well as, I mean, I was at Berchtesgaden for about a month or so, and I was recalled back to the battalion headquarters.
Okay.
And the day after I was recalled back to the battalion headquarters, the base was overrun by North Vietnamese sappers and commando type soldiers came through the wire, and all sorts of people were killed. So literally the day after I left, there was significant casualties there. So I thank God that I left at the right time.
And that was a pretty big fire base. You said if you had a 105 battery,
oh yeah,
155 battery, and mortars.
It was a significant fire base. There were a lot of soldiers there, but apparently it was in the wrong spot from the North Vietnamese perspective. So they put a lot of effort into hitting that base pretty hard.
So you got called back to battalion. Did they have another job for you? Or?
They had a job opening there where they needed somebody with a fire direction background, so they called me back. So I was in the battalion headquarters from that point, pretty much that for the rest of my tour there. I was in the battalion command situation, the command post. I was
and would
there.
the command post move, or were you basically the same location?
We were at the same location the whole time I was there. Okay. So that would have been from probably September, October of 1969 till June of 1970. I left in June 22nd, 1970. So for the rest of the time I was there, except for one mission where we went up to the demilitarized zone on a raid. Okay. I was with a group that went up to the DMZ on an artillery raid for a week to 10 days. It was a special mission. We went up there, so I was picked for that, myself and a couple other people.
How many guns did they have on that raid? Was it a whole battery, or?
They had a whole battery go up for that. Yeah, I was right up near the place called Camp Carroll where the Marines were at one time, but they had been pulled out, and the 1st and the 5th Mechanized Division was in that area, so we were called up for a special mission, and support some infantry operations up there for, again, a short period, but it was not a long-term, situation.
And it just provided FDC services. And
right, FDC services for our one battery that was up there at the time.
What difference did you denote? Now here you've had a few months at the battery level out in the field, and not saying the battalion was the rear, but did you find differences in how things were done, the procedures, the protocol?
Well, yes. I mean, the procedures were supposed to be the same. If we're, my role as a fire direction specialist, we were supposed to be doing, calculations confirming what the field was telling us they were going to do. But it was more kind of by the book, if you will, in the battalion headquarters, or they had certain procedures. You had our battalion colonel there and all the senior officers there, so it was more kind of a protocol by the book environment than being on a field position. I don't mean that critically, but it's just a different environment that we were in. But we did the similar type of thing. It's just we were reacting and trying to provide support for the people in the field, so we were very cognizant or aware of what they needed. They needed, confirmation quickly. They needed us to be responsive and helpful and do whatever we could do to support them in the field. So that's what our goal was, really.
Would the battalion supply the net information for the batteries? The meteorological things where they calculate the effect of the humidity on the flight of the shell, or did that come to you from someplace else, or don't you recall?
I don't recall exactly. I know there was some consideration for those aspects of it, but I can't recall exactly how that was calculated, to be honest with you, at this point. I haven't thought about that for many years, but I know again, there was, that was part of the overall concern about, how things would work and whether.
Well, we, just kind of as a side, we always had the thing, all that stuff didn't matter anyway that you wanted to do because, after you made your first adjustment, you accounted for it all anyway.
Right.
But,
Want to make sure that first shell got where you put it, right?
A lot of them, they had to have all the box checked and all that. So, how was your daily life at the battalion? What was your routine like? Did you work certain shifts or?
Yeah, we had, it's interesting you mentioned that. We worked 7 days a week, 12-hour shifts each day. So basically what would happen is you could be on the 2 o'clock in the afternoon till 2 o'clock in the morning shift, or conversely, 2 in the morning till 2 in the afternoon, and you just have to adjust your sleep patterns appropriately. And about once a month or so, they would alternate the assignments, so you would switch over the time frames. So they gave everybody kind of an equal treatment there. But it was 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, and I thought it was a great group of guys there, and we worked well as a team, and we had some fine officers that we were working with, and our commanding officer was a great guy. I had a lot of respect for all of them. So I thought we did a good job for the 101st supporting the infantry comrades in the field.
How were you supplied? Were you basically supplied by the road or by air? Or?
At the battalion headquarters, we were supplied really by both. Primarily, this was a major base camp with 10,000 soldiers.
Oh, okay.
So at Camp Eagle, roughly it was like a small town or a large town, if you will. And so they brought a lot in by trucks that was shipped in by either, airplane, the supplies, or by ship up the coast. So a lot of our supplies, whether it was ammo or food or whatever the other is, it could be weapons, the rifles that we carried as protection. That was various ways that were given to us.
While you were on this, while you were there, did you have to pull any other duties like perimeter security or things like that?
Yeah, guard duty was one of the things that we were given the option for. So if you're one of the select soldiers picked, you would be on. Our battalion was responsible for a certain portion of the perimeter of Camp Eagle. So 2nd, 11th Field Artillery might have had a mile or whatever the distance was. I don't recall. I remember being out there in the middle of the night in these bunkers, or some of these bigger fortifications, looking out through the barbed wire and the minefields and the fougasse areas to see if somebody was going to be coming through the perimeter at us. But I did serve there in guard duty capacity sometimes.
How often would you have to do that?
It might be you get a chance once every 3-4 weeks.
Okay.
It could be roughly. That was
that.
kind of my recollection.
And the base was big enough where you had like regular mess halls and things
Oh
like
yes,
that.
yeah. They had a regular. They had a fairly large mess hall that would service all the soldiers that were there, 150 or 200 when you consider the headquarters battery and the supply group and the others there. It might have been 100 to 150. I'm saying maybe a little bit more. That was a good size mess hall there, and they had. Trucks assigned to our group, and they had a maintenance group there. So we used to do maintenance on vehicles on occasion, which I'm not an expert on cars, but I tried to do the best I could.
You muddled your way through. Huh?
Well, they had inspections on periodically, so I was nominated a few times to do certain basic maintenance of the vehicles. With a mechanic show me how to do it.
Would they rotate people from the firing batteries out in the field to the battalion for a while, or maybe as a reward that if you had 6-8 months in the field, then they'd bring you back? Or
well, they did some of that. They actually moved people out from battalion to the. Sometimes it worked the opposite way, where you'd be in battalion and you would go out to one of the field batteries. So that seemed to be the more likely rotation. They didn't bring too many people in from the field to the headquarters group unless we had somebody leaving country and they had a shortage of personnel. But I was kind of an unusual person or situation where they brought me in. Didn't
Well,
happen too
it's
often.
just like a scenario if, like a firing battery, they lost 2 guys, FDC, either through rotation or enemy action, that they weren't replaced, so somebody might get volunteered.
It could
to go
happen,
get-
but to be honest with you, my recollection was not too many people were in that situation, other than a good friend of mine went to Firebase Ripcord from, as a matter of fact, he slept in the next cot over from me. He was a good friend, and he was assigned to the Ripcord Alpha Battery there. He was one of the few exceptions who went from headquarters out to the field, so.
While Ripcord was going on, and obviously you're in the battalion FDC, did you monitor it fairly well on the
I mean, we
on the
were,
net?
yes, we were well aware that there was a lot of activity at Ripcord. I mean, we would talk to these people over the radio frequently, people at Ripcord and people at other fire bases, but that was the one where there was more action. And when I was there, and I'm sure even after, I left in June, so the major action on Ripcord was action for a number of months, but the major action was in July of 1970, I believe. So it happened after I left, but it was also significant before that. I remember it very well.
How about drug use? You know, we hear these stories about, you know, Vietnam and everybody smoking dope and this and that, and you had a kind of a unique experience where you're in 4 fire bases for a while, now you're back in the battalion rear at Camp Eagle. What was your experience with that?
Well, to be honest, I never got involved with that myself, but I saw marijuana in the base, in the larger base, you know, Camp Eagle at the battalion headquarters. I mean, you kind of have to be blind not to see it, at least from my perspective, but I saw a fair amount of that used by some of the enlisted people there. I don't know why they did it, but they were doing the marijuana.
Was there any talk or rumors or anything about harder drug use or?
There was talk about it, but I never really saw any kind of other significant use of heroin or anything that was stronger than that. It was mostly marijuana. You could just smell it around there. I said, you know, I know what it smells like, but I didn't want to get involved with marijuana. I got enough challenges being in Vietnam without doing drugs.
Amen. Yeah. Did you have much contact with the civilian Vietnamese population?
We had some Kit Carson scouts who were, you know, in our area, and I met some of those fellows. I guess they were in what they used to call the Chu Hoi program, and I got to know them. They were nice guys, and you know, we would see them and talk to them. But they would go from, they would be in our area temporarily. They would go out to the field, and you'd see them periodically, come back, and you know, we'd talk to them how it went. And they were nice people and friendly. Did a good job from what I understand. And we also people involved with some of the menial tasks around that base. They would bring in local Vietnamese people to the different, you know, what I'm going to call basic jobs around it, whether it's cleaning up or, you know, they actually had like a laundry there where they would do clothes and things. Silly as that sounds.
That was run by Vietnamese?
Yes.
That did that?
It was, yeah.
Were they kind of regulated or supervised, or?
They were supervised. I mean, they would make sure that people weren't walking in with guns or, you know, grenades or anything. But I think it was just local populace that was involved with, you know, helping run that base. And I don't recall them doing anything other than some basic work, and then seeing some of these soldiers that were involved. They were scout type people that were in our battalion headquarters. You'd see them come in there sometimes.
Were you able to get off the base and like go into Phu-Bai or?
I got off the, yes, we used to go over to Eagle Beach once in a while. We'd get passes, but, you know, our officers would give us a day pass or overnight pass in country, so we'd go over there for a night or two or, you know, for the day and kind of relax at the beach, protected by some nice infantry soldiers on the perimeter, so we didn't have to worry about getting shot up, hopefully. But that was a nice diversion from, you know, a real stressful year.
Right. So would you be able to also go into like Fubai City, the town of Fubai? And,
Well,
Or no?
I wasn't personally. I don't know whether, I mean, you could drive around the base if you had a particular, thing to do, but we weren't really going outside the perimeter unless it
Okay.
was to like an Eagle Beach. I mean, some people may have, but my group and we would go over in, trucks. They would truck us over a bunch of people at a time. So I guess the answer is no, other than special.
What was the, now you're at the battalion headquarters and there's about 120 people there and all the various tasks. What was the racial makeup of the battalion headquarters?
As far as the racial makeup, it was mostly whites. The officer positions, not all necessarily, but mostly, as I recall. Black African Americans and the enlisted men in the NCO ranks. Probably, it's a fair amount. It could be anywhere from 15 to 25, 30%. Minorities. So there was a significant amount. Some Latinos, but mostly blacks and a higher percentage whites. But there were a lot of the infantry mixture might have been different than the artillery group.
In your experience with your battalion, complement or other units, did you detect any racial tension or?
Yes, significant racial tension. Plus, I also detected there was people kind of looked the other way. They didn't really want to address it. It was a pretty sensitive issue. I mean, I never had any problems with anybody myself personally because, hey, I just looked at it, we're all soldiers, we're trying to do, serve our country and trying to help each other out as buddies or friends or comrades. So I don't care whether somebody's black or white or whatever. But it was clear that there was a tension there about the blacks, especially maybe blacks from the northern part of our country, as strange as that might sound, with different attitudes.
How did that manifest? How did that tension manifest itself?
Well, there was almost like people were, I don't want to say they were disobeying commands, but there was almost like, you could see it sometimes where maybe some soldiers weren't responsive to NCO type commands or doing what they were told to do, whereas if I was told, I did what I was asked, I didn't question it, other people might, and they might say, I'm not doing that. So there was, they just had a different attitude, some of these people. That was just my own observation.
Was there some self-segregation, or did everybody mingle, or did the blacks stay with the blacks and the whites stay with the whites?
I think it varied. I mean, some of them just kind of associated with their own types, but I mean, a lot of the guys, I'm fine with them, but there was some of that segregation by choice, it seemed. Some of the black guys would just hang around with the blacks, but there was antipathy and almost like a confrontation sometimes, where there might even be physical, fights and things where they weren't really addressing the problem. But it's difficult in a combat environment to do that.
In addition to this reluctance to obey, did you witness any other manifestations of insubordination in the?
Well, I recall some fights and things where people got into, some fisticuffs type things where it could have been racially motivated, but not major, but there was some of that. There was an underlying current of it being, there, and to me that was an unfortunate aspect of it because I grew up with, black people living with them. I never had any problems, but there was a tension there at times.
And you said the command structure was reluctant to address it?
Well, that's my perspective as a enlisted man. To me it seemed like there was a problem, but I never really heard. Now maybe I wasn't privy to the discussions of the officers, but they're there to do a certain mission, and the goal is to achieve that mission, and they got to do what they have to do. I always felt that there was a tension and there was a certain issues that they weren't really bringing to the surface because I'm not sure how they would have addressed them. In fact, I don't know if they had the answer if anybody did. It was just a very difficult time in our country where there was a lot of things going on racially in the U.S. and the military was a reflection of that society, in my opinion.
Okay, so you've spent the rest of your time at Camp Eagle. Well, it's time to go home. You got your orders to come home. Where did you process out of country at?
Well, I actually sent us down to Cameron Bay. I remember getting on a plane in Da Nang and flying down to Cameron Bay. I was NCO at the time at E5 and getting in there and meeting a lot of guys going home on the so-called Freedom Bird was a nice feeling that I made it back. I was getting ready to go home and see my family.
And
So it was a nice
from
feeling.
Cameron, you went to...
Flew to Fort Lewis, Washington from Cameron, and then I was there for a day or two, and then went back to Newark, New Jersey, and then home. I remember coming home, my father welcoming me home with a big banner on our house, "Welcome home, John."
Oh, great.
So that was nice.
That's wonderful.
That was something I'll never forget.
Now, were you out of the Army then? Were you able to
Yes.
separate? Okay, so you got it dropped when you got out, and
Yeah, basically what happened was I had less than 5 months of time to do at that point in time, and the Army's position or their procedure was if you had less than 5 months, you were given what they call an early out. So I was discharged from the Army honorably.
you didn't think about re-upping or anything?
Well, it wasn't, on the top of my list, let me just put it that way, because I had a great job that was sitting there for me. I had, my family there, and Vietnam was still going on, so I was pretty thankful to have gotten out of there in one piece, and I felt for the guys I served with, because Ripcord and other things were still going on, and I was in touch with my friends, via letters and things, and I kind of knew what was happening over there in the rough, to a certain extent, but I was happy I made it out of there in one piece.
Did you feel guilty that you were at home and they were still in the crap, so to speak? Or?
Well, I never really felt guilty. I was kind of happy, but I felt for them. I felt for the guys I served with because I know what they were going through, and I had a sense, and I just prayed that they would make it out alive and they would get home to their families and their loved ones too.
So you're just very empathetic for them.
Yes.
So what job did you go back to then?
I was working for a company called the Prudential Insurance Company down in Newark, New Jersey, so I had a really good job sitting, waiting for me, and came back and got a 25% pay raise, which was nice. I got all the promotions and pay raises while I was in the service, and that's where I was going to spend my career. So I was and I had a lot of friends there who were glad to have me come back, and it gave me a nice send-off when I left. So it was a great company to work for.
And you got on with the rest of your life. Right?
Yeah. I mean, I had mixed emotions about it because it was a tough experience, and I had a lot of friends who served in Vietnam, in the Marine Corps, other Army units, friends who were in other units when I was over there at the same time, and some people were killed, some people were wounded, and it was just a tough time in our lives. But I was just personally very happy that I served. I was privileged to serve with such a wonderful group of people. In retrospect, even more than I thought at the time. But it was a life-changing experience, but it gave you a lot of pause to thank God for, what a great country and what a wonderful group of people and what the military is. It's a great group of guys, and men and women.
Thank you very much for your story, John. That's great.
Thank you. Thank you for the...